One of my favorite crops for the summer garden are cucumbers, and they're actually pretty easy to grow. They do have very long vines for the most part, so you'll want to have a sturdy trellis for them. And I find that they do really well on my 4x4 livestock panel fencing, and they climb up with their own tendrils. But there are space saver types cucumbers that you can grow in containers and that don't need the trellis and support. Now, some of the varieties that do best for me, I think the hands down favorite for most gardeners is straight 8. And another great one is the Market More. Now, Market More has a much deeper green skin, and I like that. And both of those have very small seed cavities, and they're very smooth skin. So typically you're going to have slicers which have a smooth skin, and then the ones with a bumpy skin or a pebbly skin tend to be pickling cucumbers. Slicers are not going to pickle well. They just won't be as crisp. So you want to make sure you're growing a pickling cucumber if you do intend to make pickles. If you're canning, now if you're doing icebox pickles, the slicers certainly work fine for that. Another one that I really like is the lemon cucumber. Now it's a round cucumber, and it will have a white or a slightly yellow skin when it's ripe. It's a little more citrusy, a little more acidic than other cucumbers, but I really like it, and it does well in the heat. Another great one is the Armenian cucumber. It has a very light green skin, and it tends to be one of the most drought tolerant. When it gets really hot and my other cucumbers are being stressed, the Armenian is still pulling through. And it's a burpless type. It has a beautiful edge, and so I like to slice it and use a melon baller to cut out a center and actually put a yogurt dip or a crab or a tuna salad in that and serve that as a canapé. Cucumbers can have a number of problems. They will tend to get bitter if they're stressed by drought, so make sure that they're well mulched and don't let them dry out too much between waterings. They may even benefit from a canopy of shade when we start to get into the triple-digit temperatures. One thing that you might notice on your cucumbers are the cucumber beetles, and they're striped or they can be a spotted type beetle, and those beetles can spread diseases. One of the most common is the wilt disease, and your whole vine will just turn brown and wilt. It's important to get those vines out, so just trim them out of your in between your other vines if you start to see your vines turning brown, so you avoid the spread of the disease. Powdery mildew is another common issue with the cucumber. Avoid touching the foliage while it's wet, and try not to water the foliage at all if you can. Drip irrigation is really ideal for cucumbers. It's best just not to wet the foliage, but touching the foliage while the foliage is wet can actually spread diseases too. Now, you might want to use spinosad for the cucumber beetles or neem products for the powdery mildew and other diseases, but be careful with using those because bees will be affected by both of those products while the foliage is wet. Make sure the bees aren't visiting your plants so that you can be safe for the bees. Now, some problems you might notice with your cucumbers: if you let your cucumbers stay on the vines too long, they will turn yellow, and they're going to be have large seeds that are hard inside and not have a great flavor. If they get overly large like this, I'll sometimes use them for aguas frescas or for facials, but not so much to eat. Now, a cucumber that's misshapen will often be a result of poor pollination, and sometimes the bees just aren't visiting your plants. You might want to plant things that bees like near your cucumbers to ensure that you're going to have a good crop. Typically, there's going to be, in a cluster of flowers on a cucumber plant, more male flowers than female flowers, and the male flowers will generally be blooming more prolifically first. And so sometimes people are concerned that they're not getting cucumbers, but what they're seeing are the male flowers blooming. A female flower is going to have a little tiny fruit behind the flower. I've brought some squash blossoms because it's easier to see with the squash, the male flower. And you can actually take a Q-tip from the stigma of the male flower and go to the female flower and pollinate yourself if you need to. And you can look for recipes for using cucumbers on our Central Texas Gardener website. For Backyard Basics, I'm Trisha Shirey.